I was actually working on a movie, and I just couldn't get back for her passing, her funeral. And so I was kind of in mourning, really, because my mother was a great influence in my life, because my dad was away at sea when I was young, and then the war started, so I was primarily brought up by my mother. And I found that all these my kind of memories of her were coming back. And I found that by scribbling them down, it was a way of making peace with myself. And a woman that a new friend of mine, came to my apartment for tea. And while I was making tea, she'd obviously saw my scribbling. And she was a very pushy woman, thankfully. And she just said, "Oh, I'm taking this. I'm going to get it typed for you." And I said, "No, but it's nothing. It's just about me and my mum." No, I'm going to get it typed for you." And she did. But before she gave it back to me, she gave it to a woman who was a famous editor. And the next thing I know, I was kind of being published by this new publishing company. So that kind of set the tone, really. So although I really don't consider myself by nature a writer, and it's very different from acting. But what's similar about it is when the mood takes me, the writing is very quick. Just kind of like falls out of my hand, really. And this was different in the sense that I had written 3 versions of my sort of memoir. And then I hadn't written anything for about 15 years, And I was asked to, I go to a kind of an esoteric bookshop in London. I was asked by the new owner to write a book for him. And contrary to when I'd been asked to write things before, I didn't feel negative about it. And I was kind of surprised that I had a kind of pleasant feeling when he was hitting on me to write something, So when he left, I just picked up my pencil and I started scribbling, and it just fell out of my hand, really. Well, I guess that in truth, my first love was cinema. And I'm not actually sure how old I was when I was taken to see my first movie. But the very first movie I ever saw was with Gary Cooper. And I could have only been about 5 or 6, maybe. And it made such a deep impression on me that I became a kind of regular cinema goer. But it was not something that I ever really thought about, I never really talked about it, because we were very poor, and my dad was a seaman, and he was a merchant seaman, and he was a stoker. Well, you don't get much lower in the scale than shoveling coal all day, into a furnace, So the thing is that it wasn't that I was not allowed to talk about acting or anything. It was just that I was sensitive enough to know not to talk about it. And it wasn't really, when I started talking about it, I was just told not to think about it. And when my dad, he didn't say very much, but when he spoke, it was kind of heavy, you know. And I was talking about acting, and he said, "Son, it's not for us, you know." And I went to argue, and he said, "Son, I don't want you to talk about it anymore." So really, in order to as I had to I was sort of compelled to try it. It involved like leaving home. So I left home, and that's when I went to drama school. But it was unbeknownst to them. I just let them think I was still doing a normal job, you know. And in fact, they didn't really know about it completely until I got my first movie, you know. So it was a huge shock for them. And I think my dad was so overwhelmed by the idea of it that just prior to them, for the car coming to pick them up, to take them to the West End screening, he announced he wasn't going. And my mother said, "Well, I'll go on my own then." It wasn't until the car was kind of outside that he suddenly rushed upstairs and put on his best suit and came down. So he was kind of like, and he never really spoke about it to me, you know what I mean? But I think that was kind of like, because he couldn't quite believe it, really. I did a little bit in a film called Term of Trial, and I did that because I knew I was going to be working with Laurence Olivier, but it was just a minor part. And then I was approached by the producers who'd bought John Fowles' first book, which was something called The Collector. And I was given the book to read. And I just knew that I couldn't play that. It just wasn't. It was out of the question, you know. So I turned it down. And they kept coming back to me, and I kept turning it down. And then finally, they came back to me, I think it was like about the third time, and they said, "Look, we've got William Wyler. You're going to turn down William Wyler." And I said, "Well, who's playing the girl?" Because it was basically a two-hander, you know. And they said, "Well, we're going to test girls." And I said, "Well, why don't I test with the girls? And then at least Wyler can see." I mean, what I meant was he can see I'm totally wrong for it. Anyway, I tested with Sarah Miles and Samantha Regal, and Wyler didn't do the test, but he flew over to England to see them, and he asked to see me. And I went up to the old Columbia building in Wardour Street, and I was waiting on a kind of, in a sort of vestibule on the first floor. And this kind of diminutive guy came out of a door, the other end of the corridor. He just walked towards me, just looking at me, you know. And he got really close, and then he stopped, and he just looked at me. And I became a bit unnerved, you know. And I said, "Have you seen the tests?" And he said, I said, "What do you think?" He said, and I said, "You know, but in the book," and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "We're not going to make the book, and you'll be just fine." Apparently, the story was that Peter O'Toole, who was a wonderful actor, but also was a kind of wonderful drinker as well. And he kind of bumped into Fellini in Italy. And he said, "We've got to make a movie together, you know." And so when Fellini was preparing his kind of masterpiece, which he never made, it was called The Voyage of Mastrona, but he'd signed and taken the money to be one of 3 directors doing an Edgar Allan Poe trio of movies. So he thought, I'll send this to that mad English actor, you know, Peter O'Toole. So he sent the script to Peter O'Toole, and he didn't hear from him. And then he got a phone call very late one night. Peter obviously had a few scotches, you know, and said, "Hi, Maestro, it's Peter O'Toole. I don't want to do your movie, I'm sorry, goodbye." and so Fellini, who'd already accepted the money to direct the movie, called a casting director in London and said, "Send me your most decadent actors." For some reason, James Fox and I were sent. I always regarded James Fox as like, I thought he was decadent. I didn't think I was decadent. Anyway, I just made this Western called Blue, and my hair, which was naturally black, had been dyed blonde, and the roots I was letting it grow out, you know. And I was also, it was the time when I was smoking a few joints, you know. Anyway, I sort of stumbled off the plane in Rome Airport, and Fellini was waiting for me at the airport. And it was just love, you know. It was just like, he looked at me and I looked at him, and he took me to his house and he wouldn't let me leave, you know. I was the guest of him and Giulietta, you know. And it wasn't until like the movie was kind of 2 weeks away that he put me in a hotel in Inglaterra, you know. But I guess so I guess really it was like Ustinov, Weiler and Fellini that were my most profound influences in making movies, you know. And none of them really directed me, but the fact that they encouraged me to do what I felt, and they seemed to approve, gave me the confidence for the rest of my career, really. No, the whole thing about Teorema was very, I mean, looking back, it was a very kind of mystical kind of experience, because I think I'd finished working with Fellini, but I was in Rome to do a little bit of post-thinking. And I feel I should mention that I'd had a terrible crush on Silvana Mangano. Since I was a boy, I'd seen her in a film called Bitter Rice. And I probably had my first wet dreams about Silvana Mangano and Bitter Rice. So I knew Via Condotta.
She wasn't wearing a lot of clothes. She wasn't wearing a lot of clothes in that movie.
Well, she was only 18 apparently. Anyway, so I'm at the time. So I'm in Via Condotte, and walking towards me in the street is Piero Tosi, who'd done my costumes for Fellini, with a friend of his called Roberto, and this woman. And I knew it was her. I mean, she's now like 45, 46. And I couldn't believe I was actually like in the same street as Silvana Mangano, you know. So we're just kind of staring at her. And Piero Tosi, he said, "Oh, Silvana," in Italian, this is Terence, you know, and she said to Tosi in Italian, he would be wonderful in Pierpaolo's film. And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, it's a film that Pasolini's making. You know Pasolini?" I said, "Well, I know his name." And she said, "Well, he's making a movie." And I said, "Are you in it?" She said, "Si, certo." So that was how I came to be in Teorema. But he didn't speak any English, so he didn't really talk to me at all. If he wanted to give me any direction, you know, he would just ask her, or he would ask somebody who spoke English. But he didn't really give me much direction at all, you know. He just kind of I can't remember any, but it was really yeah. I mean, that was it. That's how we did the movie. You know, it was amazing that it was so successful. Really. It was a project that he had, and I was asked to go and meet him. He'd seen something that I'd done, and I think it was in Paris. I flew to Paris to meet him, and the thing that struck me about him was that he was so. It's hard to explain what a great sort of soul he was, you know. But the thing that I noticed during that dinner was that he never really showed much of himself. But whenever I said something that kind of gave him an indication of where I was at, he just kind of expanded himself to accommodate this new question I'd asked, you know. So at the end of the dinner, we were really talking about like quite deep things, you know. But I remember that he never really made me feel uncomfortable. He just made me feel absolutely wonderful. And it was interesting because this last movie that I've just done was a very sort of 3-day, was a very short job, but it was a very intense job. And when I was on the set for the first day, I was kind of introduced myself to some of the crew, and one of the guys said, "It's so wonderful that you're doing this, because when I read the script, I thought there's only 2 actors who could do this, Terence and Orson." I thought, wow, I've really made it. He was basically becoming a young gangster. And my mother said to me, "I wonder if you could have a word with Chris, because he's going the wrong way, you know, and he's going to get into trouble." And the thing about him was that he was 4 years younger than me. But he was tough in a way that I wasn't. So although we were similar, I was kind of yin and he was kind of yang, you know. So I didn't really know how to approach him. But I arranged to meet him this one time. And he was very, he he wasn't very compliant, you know what I mean? Like he'd come to the meeting, but he was smart, so he realised that my mum had said something. So he didn't want to be there really. So I said to him, and I realised this, it was like a difficult conversation, you know. And I'd never been in the kind of elder brother role before, you know. So finally I said to him, listen man, like, you know, you're 16, you know what I mean? Like, what are you into? Like, what interests you? And he said, well, girls. And I said, well, what kind of girls? He said, well, muscly, sort of fit girls. So I said, well, what about ballet dancers? And he said, yeah. Ballet dancers, yeah. I said, well, if you went up to Sadler's Wells, just rocked up to the stage door and said that, like, you were interested in being a stagehand and you'd do anything, you could talk your way into that. And he said, do you reckon? I said, yeah, I reckon. And I never heard from him. Like months went by. And I finally got a call from him. And he was on tour with Sadler's Wells Ballet. And during that time, he realized that the pop scene was where it was happening. And he met this guy who was a very exquisite sort of gay guy called Kit Lambert, who was the son of Constant Lambert, who was like a brilliant composer-conductor, who was like as aristocratic as my brother was working class. And they really hit it off. And they both wanted to make movies, but they decided a quick way to get into the movie business was to find a group and make them famous. And they found this group called the High Numbers, and they renamed them the Who. And that was how my brother made his first million. You know? He later he invented The Crazy World of Arthur Brown, you know, wrote Fire. And that doco was actually the only real, he produced Tommy. And he stole my pink suit to take Tommy to Cannes. And I was just stopped by people in the streets and, oh my God, your brother's pink suit. I said, what? That's my brother Chris, who unfortunately died a few years ago, but then he did have an extremely excessive life. It's hard for me to kind of, put the reasons for my choices into words. You know. It was just something that I had always kind of I'd always fancied working with John Hurt. I knew John Hurt was like, he was known in the business as a difficult guy, but I thought he was the most wonderful actor. And I was kind of seduced by Jeremy Thomas, who was the producer. And he said to me that he needed somebody like myself to play this character because he wanted a kind of an ambivalence. He wanted the audience not to really know about where my character was acting. And I thought to myself that I've noticed from where I grew up that a lot of the very tough kind of gangsters were kind of androgynous. They were very violent, but they had a kind of feminine side. And that was what interested me about this character. I thought, if I can kind of give that impression, I can keep this afloat, you know. So that was the reason I did it. But also that, you know, when I met Stephen Frears, I mean, I know about what makes a great director, you know, and I knew he was a great director straight away. Didn't worry me at all that it was his first feature, you know. Bliss.
Yes, sir.
Now, what can I say that doesn't reveal too much about myself? Well, not in my youth, but in my kind of late youth, I lived with a geisha in Kyoto. And I learned about what we call in the West like tantric sex, which is basically it's about separating orgasm from ejaculation, you know, in order to prolong one's performance. And so I thought Bliss would be a wonderful kind of vehicle to, without admitting it in public, it would be a way of showing my kind of the direction of which I was living my life. The reason I was sort of late in getting here tonight was that there was a horde of people outside my hotel with dozens of photographs, all of General Zod. And that was all they wanted, you know. It didn't matter about Priscilla and the collector. Could you sign it to Zod, please? And the thing about it, I think that I mean, look, I'm going to be 80 at the end of the month, so I've got no things that I need to, you know, protect anymore, really. But the fact is and my own feeling about General Zod and why it had such an impact is that from 1968, I was kind of out of work for about 7 years. Now, during that time, I came to the realization that every actor has a long career, has a kind of a period, a lull in their career. Like Jack Nicholson, you know, didn't get his first movie till he was like in his late 20s, you know. Even Cary Grant had a kind of a lull in the middle of his career, you know. So I coped with being out of work by going east. And I lived and traveled in India for most of that time. I wasn't there exclusively, but but I spent most of the time there. And in 1976, I'd heard about this ashram in Pune, where they were very interested in kind of tantric sex and things, and it was a mixed ashram. So I was in Bombay, and I thought I'd check it out. So I travelled up to Pune, and sure enough, there was this mesmerising guy called Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh. Now, I can't speak for, I don't really want to say whether I felt he was an enlightened soul. He certainly was different from other realized people that I've met. However, he was an extraordinary kind of guy. And he was probably the greatest actor I'd ever come across. He was a mesmerizing speaker. And I was renamed. I was called Swami V10. And I was moved from the Blue Diamond Hotel into the ashram with this new name. And I took on all the orange robes and everything. I was there for a year. And on Sunday mornings, myself and the other English swamis would go to the Blue Diamond Hotel for what was laughingly called full English breakfast, which is just every breakfast you can imagine on one big plate. And on this particular morning, I went in and the concierge, and I'd only been there for like a weekend originally, but when I walked in, the concierge said, "Mr. Terence, we've got a cable for you, sir." And he gave me this cable, and it was the old-fashioned English telegram, and it was addressed to Terence Stamp, the Rough Diamond Hotel, Pune, India. And immediately the weight of it increased, you know. So this has got to be a life-changing telegram here, you know. And I opened it, and it was from my long-suffering agent in London called Jimmy Fraser. And he said, "Dear Terence, I wonder if you could come back to London to meet Richard Donner. He's making Superman 1 and 2, and it's starring Marlon Brando, and he's interested to meet you." So of course I was on the plane the next day. And when I got on the set, I was still in orange. I didn't have any other clothes, you know. I was like a swan again. And I saw, and my own personal idol was like Marlon Brando. I mean, first was Gary Cooper, second was Marlon Brando, you know. And I see on the set Marlon, very overweight, and he's talking to two really delicious Oriental girls, and they're giggling, and he's talking to them, and they're giggling, and he's talking to them, and he sees me. And he comes over to me and he said, "Terence, I'm Marlon Brando, you know." "Yeah, I know you are, Marlon. What can I do for you?" And he said, "See those two women over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "They want your dick." That was my first day as General Zod. And it got better from then on.